how it starts. A ghostly voice, a creaking door, a ride into the afterlife sponsored by Disney. It set the tone for an entire generation of Gothic misfits, like Jack Skellington dancing through Halloween Town, or Beetlejuice dropping into the underworld in striped suits. Disney's Haunted Mansion invented that tone. Playful horror, a visual tightrope walk between childhood whimsy and existential dread. It even spawned 2 films made decades apart. But what if the Haunted Mansion isn't about ghosts at all? What if it's about something much harder to look at? Because here's the secret. The Haunted Mansion was never only a ride. It's a ritual. A Gothic comedy where death wears a top hat and invites you in for tea. And that's not a theory. It was built after Walt Disney's own death, during an era when America was sanitizing death and hiding it in funeral homes. So Disney did something radical and turned a haunted house idea into a ride, made it marketable with a fast pass. But what no one talks about is you don't just ride through the Haunted Mansion, you pass through something else entirely. And by the time you hear that final line,
"And a ghost will follow you home,"
you realize that this story was never about the ghosts. It was always about you. In the 1950s, Walt Disney had a vision. A haunted house, not the typical decrepit and grotesque, but pristine. Statues polished, gardens trimmed, a home so well kept it made the ghosts feel welcome. He told Imagineers to build a haunted mansion that didn't look abandoned because in his world, even death should have curb appeal. But the project stalled. Years passed. Tone wars broke out. Funny or frightening? Spooky or silly? The mansion sat empty. Then in 1966, Walt Disney died, and that changed everything. Walt, a futurist, a dreamer. But now, the man who built a kingdom on eternal childhood had vanished, and his ghost lingered. Imagineers were left holding blueprints and grief. The Haunted Mansion, which had been concept art and arguments for a decade, suddenly became something else. It wasn't a ride anymore. It was a memorial. It finally opened in 1969, the same year the world fractured. Woodstock, Vietnam, the Manson slayings, the moon landing, a time when America was asking, what even is the future anymore? And right in the middle of that chaos, Disney opened a ride where death was staged, choreographed, scored to music. But no one ever asks the obvious question. Why are the ghosts there, happy to be dead? That smile is painted on, but it's just a mask. And like all good masks, it hides something deeper and darker. To understand why Disney's ghosts are grinning, you have to go back. Not just to the 1960s, but to America's relationship with death itself. A relationship that got sterilized, sanitized, and sealed behind closed doors. By the mid-20th century, America was no longer grieving out loud. The age of black veils and mourning portraits was over. In came the hospital curtain, the funeral parlor euphemisms, the idea of death as a private matter to be dealt with by professionals, quietly, invisibly. Where grief used to mean candles and community, it now meant paperwork and closed caskets. Where funerals used to happen at home, now they were outsourced. And where death once meant ritual, it now meant removal. America became afraid to look death in the eye, so we stopped looking. So what did Disney do? He built a ride, one where death sings in harmony, where a man hangs himself before your eyes, where a bride wields an axe to her husbands one by one and smiles about it.
For better or for worse?
Where there's a graveyard full of drunkards, duelists, and dancing skeletons. But here's the trick. You're not horrified. You're entertained. Because by turning death into a performance, with special effects, ghostly illusions, and toe-tapping music, Disney did something radical. It made death manageable. This video took hours of research and a questionable amount of caffeine. So please hit the like button on the video. Now, before we get to the dad jokes, it's what Madame Leota would have wanted, probably. With a fast pass and a sense of humor, Disney turned death into a joke, and we bought tickets and stood in line. When you pass through the mansion's halls, past the endless portraits, the swinging candelabras, the ballroom full of ghosts still waltzing, you're not just seeing spirits, you're seeing us. So why are the ghosts so happy? Because they're not just dead. Maybe they're what we wish death could be. Predictable, polished, funny.
Why don't ghosts like rain?
Because it dampens their spirits.
Charming in a you-might-die-laughing kind of way. They're our own fear of death, edited, scored, and looped on a track. So when the ghost host says,
"And a ghost will follow you home,"
it sounds like a joke. But what if it's not? We'll come back to that. These ghosts are our invention, our projection. The Haunted Mansion may have started as a ride, but in 2003, we got the first Haunted Mansion film, starring Eddie Murphy. A goofy, over-the-top, CGI-heavy comedy. Or at least that's how it was marketed. But hidden under the slapstick was a love story. The story is simple, but symbolic. A wealthy man falls in love with a woman society said he couldn't have. She was poisoned. Her lover took his life. The mansion is cursed. And their ghosts keep waiting for someone to tell the truth, to acknowledge the love that got erased. Eddie Murphy plays a real estate agent who's too busy for his wife and kids, until a haunted house literally locks him in and demands him to feel something. That's the twist no one talks about. The ghosts aren't trying to scare him. They're trying to wake him up. Fast forward 20 years to 2023. New cast, new effects, new audience, same emotion. This time, the grief isn't buried. It's front and center. The main character is a man who lost his wife. Every character carries a scar. Gabby and her son Travis are coping with the death of Travis's father, a priest desperate to help people who can't help themselves. Even the villain, Crump, doesn't gain power from death. He feeds on denial, on people too scared to move on. This is more than horror. It's emotional archaeology. In the reboot, grief isn't a plot device. It's the villain, the setting, and the curse. Some of us think of ghosts as fiction, but in the Victorian era, they were family. The 19th century wasn't just obsessed with death, it was dressed for it. Black lace, jet jewelry, lockets filled with hair, and the Haunted Mansion. It borrows everything. Back then, when someone died, they weren't taken to a morgue right away. They were photographed. It's called memento mori, Latin for remember you must die. Death was expensive, intimate, and deeply visual. And in the Haunted Mansion, these ideas linger like dust. Paintings that age into corpses. Portraits that change when lightning flashes. Rooms where the walls stretch, revealing decay beneath elegance. It's a ride through a photo album of the dead. After the Civil War, where over 600,000 people died, brothers, fathers, sons, there was grieving across America. That's when a spiritual movement exploded in the US called spiritualism. People didn't want closure, they wanted contact. Seances became mainstream. Mediums, ghost photography. People were mourning while calling out to the afterlife. Mediums like the Fox sisters claimed to channel the dead, but later proved to be a hoax. Spirit photography promised portraits of your loved ones and the ghosts beside them. Even Mary Todd Lincoln held seances in the White House, trying to reach her son, Willie, after his death. By the 1870s, spiritualism was less of a fringe belief and more of a national religion of grief. And Disney's Haunted Mansion channels it literally. Enter Madame Leota, arguably the mansion's most popular character, the disembodied medium in the seance room, floating in the crystal ball. She's more than just a cool visual. She's a time traveler from America's strangest spiritual moment, the great ghost boom of the 19th century. A nod to real 19th century mediums who claimed to contact the dead through table rapping, ectoplasm, and spirit trumpets. Disney's Imagineers were deeply inspired by this history. Madame Leota's crystal ball is a Victorian seance trope. Rattling table legs, flashing lights, disembodied voices, straight out of spirit-calling stage shows.
Serpents and spiders, tail of a rat, call in the spirits wherever they're at.
Even her name, Leota, is a nod to Leota Toombs, the real-life Disney employee whose face was used for the effect and whose name sounds like a haunted riddle. Every floating object, every flickering candle, it's historical. She was pulled straight out of Victorian spiritualism. Floating table? Check. Glowing crystal ball? Check. Latin-sounding incantations? All part of the act. This seance scene was modeled after the real-life parlor seances of the 1800s, where Americans gathered in drawing rooms, dimmed the lights, and begged the dead to speak. And they believed the dead answered. After losing Prince Albert, Queen Victoria wore black for 40 years, and millions followed her lead. Victorian mourning came with a rule book. Stage 1, full mourning, black clothing, no jewelry, no social events. Stage 2, half mourning, add grey, lavender. Some outings permitted. Widows could be expected to grieve publicly for up to 2 years. Grief was performative, and in the Haunted Mansion, what are the ghosts wearing? Period suits, widow's gowns, top hats, veils. They're not random props. They're dressed for death. You came for thrills. But somewhere between the graveyard and the attic, you wandered into a funhouse version of America's grieving process. Some rides have animatronics.
Howdy, folks! Welcome to the Jamboree!
The Haunted Mansion has a pulse, a ghost story told in architecture. Because the building is haunted, but it's also the haunting. The mansion's look is a Frankenstein's monster of American grief. The Disneyland version is modeled after the Shipley Lydecker house, a real antebellum mansion built in 1803 in Baltimore, Maryland. That's why, inside the Haunted Mansion, you step into another century entirely. Doors breathe, chandeliers sway without wind. Rooms stretch as if time is elastic. Even before you see a single ghost, the house acts haunted. This isn't just spooky fun, it's smart storytelling. Because the mansion is your first ghost. A spectral presence built from 1800s mourning rituals, antebellum nostalgia, and Gilded Age decay. In classic Gothic literature from the fall of the House of Usher to Rebecca, the house is never just a house. The deeper you go, the more unhinged it becomes. Hallways stretch into nowhere. Portraits shift when you're not looking. And a ballroom sways with ghosts who never left. It reflects its owner's mind, a crumbling mind in architectural form. The Haunted Mansion is haunted, but by clashing aesthetics as much as it is by ghosts. It's Gothic horror wrapped in Saturday morning cartoons. It's funeral parlor architecture narrated by a guy cracking jokes from the afterlife. It's a monster mash that feels like it shouldn't work, and yet it totally does. Why? Because tonally, this ride isn't just spooky. It's a fine line between scary and whimsy. The Haunted Mansion's essence is that tone. The stretching room portraits show people seconds before death, but the deaths are so exaggerated they feel like comic panels. One guy sinks into quicksand. Another sits on a barrel of dynamite. This isn't realism. The Imagineers wanted scares, but what they really wanted was style. The Haunted Mansion feels like Tim Burton's childhood scrapbook, decades before he became a director. The ghosts in the graveyard. They're less The Exorcist and more what it would look like if Halloween Town had a nervous breakdown. Singing busts. A guy on a seesaw with a skeleton. It's Looney Tunes meets Dracula if Dracula had impeccable comedic timing.
Why did the vampire break up with the ghost?
I don't know, why? Because he just wasn't her type.
Even the villain types like the bride and the ghost host are more archetypal than terrifying. They borrow from the Universal Monsters playbook. Recognizable silhouettes. Iconic costuming. This is horror, distilled down to its Halloween costume essence. It's about iconography. The mansion whispers, you can laugh at your fears if you design them right. And that's the ride's visual spell. You're surrounded by death, but it's gorgeous, stylized. The tone is so masterfully mixed, it lets kids ride through hanging gags and a crazed axe bride and come out smiling. The Haunted Mansion is a haunted aesthetic. It tells you something your therapist might not. You don't have to avoid fear. You can curate it, decorate it, and then ride through it with music playing. Whether they meant to or not, the ride accidentally became a perfect metaphor for the 5 stages of grief. Let's break it down. There are 999 happy haunts in the Haunted Mansion, and the ghost host says,
But there's room for 1,000.
Then, the final line before you exit playfully says,
And a ghost will follow you home.
Most people laugh it off. But what if it's not a joke? What if the ghost is you? Because the moment you entered the stretching room, something shifted. You didn't just step into the Haunted Mansion. You crossed over. That room was your death, metaphorically. After the death scene, the ghost host says,
Now, as they say, look alive.
Insinuating that you aren't alive anymore. The walls stretch. The endless hallway? That's disorientation from being angry. The ghosts in the ballroom are frozen in an endless party, replaying the same joy over and over. They refuse to move on, so they're denying death by living in a perpetual celebration of the past. That's denial. The seance. You're searching for answers, trying to connect. That's bargaining. The attic with the bride, confronting the truth head-on. And the truth hits. That's depression. And the graveyard? It's not frightening. It's a party. That's acceptance. This isn't just a haunted house. It's the 5 stages of grief dressed in cobwebs and candlelight. By the time you reach the gift shop, you've been transformed. Not scared, changed. The other spirits? Unfortunately, they all seem to have trouble getting through. That's what the ghost host tells you. They're still stuck. They're proof that not everyone gets through it the same way. Some never leave the ballroom, replaying their joy. Some haunt the attic, trapped in heartbreak. Some get stuck in denial. Some throw a party to avoid feeling anything at all. They're unfinished. When you leave, the ghost host says,
They have selected you to fill our quota.
And Madame Leota calls out,
Be sure to bring your death certificate.
It's confirmation that you did die on that ride, metaphorically. Because when you leave, a ghost does follow you home. You are the ghost. You passed through all 5 stages, and you made it out. You saw what it means to live with death, and when that voice says,
"And a ghost will follow you home,"
you finally understand. Grief never really leaves us. It just changes shape, and sometimes it even learns to smile. Of course, that's just a theory. Maybe it's just a ride after all. I'll leave that for you to decide. Let me know. Have you been on the ride or seen the movies? Which version is your favorite? And for all things weird and dark, subscribe to become a Mystic Seeker. Thanks for watching.